there are many people who are ready to have programs that don't involve Zoom, as well as people who want to continue Zoom. So
I want Zoom, and I want to come to the meeting. And if it's in my building, that's what I want.
Well,
and that's what it's going to be.
I mean, that would be that's an interesting perspective. This might be something where we need to find some compromise. I will obviously talk to my colleagues about this, but ultimately this is a decision that is being made, by my betters. We can, but let's talk about it at another time when we're not.
Okay, I left you a message. I didn't hear from you.
Okay, thank you for letting me know. All right, good. Yeah, no, I haven't. My phone. I know that there's a message blinking on my phone, but I've been in meetings all day. All right. So the other thing I wanted to say, right, about these texts, right, is that very often sacred texts say things, right? They include behaviors, thoughts, ideas, so on and so forth, that we in general would find quite disturbing. But at the same time, right, they are unfortunately something that's somewhat real about the world, and that it's something real about human nature. So hold on one second. I'm not sure what is going on.
You just got us back.
Oh, we got us back.
You got us back.
I gotcha. Okay.
Oh, since we got us.
And so, so in a sense, these texts often sort of represent an uncomfortable mirror, right, to the human condition. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I wonder if that's really true, because if the religious leaders keep having to tell people they should or shouldn't do something, maybe it means they're not obeying them because that's not natural to them.
I completely agree, right? I completely agree, right? The only reason there's rules about stuff, right, is if people are doing something that's not the same as the rule, right? So when we, hi Matilda, when we find, right, but there's another level of that, right, which is that non-compliance with whatever sort of community standard there is, right, strikes a chord and makes a problem, right? So for instance, like on one hand, right, there is a tendency among people, I think this is a people thing, right, is that we tend towards towards binary thinking. Things are good or they're bad, right? Things are black or they're white. People are men or they're women, right? Whereas the reality of the world is that things are not binary like that, right? Things are very complicated, right? And so very often what we see in these texts, right? I think that one of these texts, right, is very much about if you're a man, you should be hanging out with men. And if you're a woman, you should be hanging out with women, right? So it's kind of both, Phyllis, right? On one hand, it's reflecting this kind of tendency in the way that people think, right, to be very binary. And it's also noticing at the same time, right, that things really aren't that binary. And so we need to double down on that binary, right? And I think today, we're just we see it. We see this now in our current situation. I think quite clearly in the context of all of these Republican states suddenly making all of these laws to try to force transgender people to be boys or girls, right? And having these, it's the science, right, that there are only two genders. That's not the science, right? The science is quite clear, right, that there are an infinite sort of way, or an infinite number of ways of expressing one's gender. And so this desire, right, to undergird binary thinking, right, it's no different now than it was then, right? And so there is a way here, right, in which this Mishnah, right, even though I disagree with it, right, is expressive of a certain level of binary thinking, right? And also, but I also think, again, if we think of Pirkei Avot, right, as kind of a rabbi's manual, which, you know, how to be an ideal rabbi, right? How to be an ideal Torah sage, right? If we think of it that way, right, then basically what I said last time, right, is that the idea of the bite, right, that a man, especially a man who is a Torah scholar, should try to avoid spending too much time running his household, right, and leave that to the women, right, or to the men who don't have any particular talent for Torah study.
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
you have something on the screen that doesn't work. Can you put it on the screen?
It is on the screen. I'm not sure what you're seeing, but all of my devices have this have the
Okay, I can make it smaller.
okay.
We could have a big long conversation about this, but I won't.
Okay. All right. So and I think the other thing is, right, another way of looking at this Mishnah, right, which doesn't make it any less offensive, I don't think, but it does.
It's offensive.
But it does allow us to, shall we say, make some use of it, right? Which is, right, that a person, and I'm saying that advisedly, right? Because I think now, right, that the kind of distinction that this Mishnah is making between men on one side and women on the other, right, is unfortunately in many places it's still very much in use and valid.
Yeah.
But I don't find that hard and fast distinction useful or helpful in the slightest. But I do think, right, that being reminded, right, to make a balance, right, between housekeeping and Torah, right, is an important thing to do, right? We all have to make our house, right? We all have to keep our houses clean and habitable and all that kind of thing, right? But if that's all we do, right, then we don't ever have any time for other meaningful work in our lives, right? And so I think that's how I would understand this, right? Don't spend too much time on your house, right, on your living area, right? Spend enough time so that you can get done what you need to get done in the realm of creative work, in the realm of being with people, whatever it is, right? Don't neglect your home, but make sure you leave time for other things, right?
Right here, I'm reading, and it says, from here, the sages said, as long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself, he neglects the study of Torah, and in the end, he will inherit Gehenna.
Yes,
now, I don't believe a word of that.
Well, neither do I, Sandy. But go ahead, Naomi.
Well, in a lot of Eastern Europe, where the men were yeshiva uchas and studying Torah, it was the women who also had to go out and make enough money to sustain the household.
Right.
Yes.
And one sort of wonders in this 2,000 or so year old context, where did the money come from to provide for the house while you weren't speaking to your wife about it?
Right. Yeah. I think that this...
Rabbi Akiva married a rich woman.
Right. Exactly. This hey, Mari, how are you? I was going to call Connie. That's why I got my phone. No, she's not there. Okay, she must have an appointment. Okay, so yes, I actually do think, Naomi, that this Mishnah is kind of the basis for that practice that you mentioned in Eastern Europe, which is still the extant practice today in much of Israel, in the Haredi ultra-Orthodox community, right? That the women are required to not only to keep the house, but also to make the living.
It also
right?
happens in parts of Brooklyn still.
Absolutely.
In Brooklyn as well.
Absolutely.
Right now in Williamsburg, Brooklyn.
Right, absolutely, right, and so my sense, right, is that now there is actually probably a little bit less of a sense, right, that spending time with your wife is a bad thing, right, as long, right, as you don't neglect your Torah study, right, but again, I think that the problem that we have with ancient texts, right, is very often that we insist upon reading them literally, right? And if we insist upon reading them literally, and only literally, right, we are not necessarily going to find them that helpful, right? We're not necessarily going to, we're not going to try to, we're not necessarily we're not going to be able to make use of the texts in terms of how to think about our lives. It might force us to look an unpleasant truth in the face, right, and deal with the fact that our society is patriarchal, and we need to figure out how to modify that, right, and change that, right. We, I had sort of realization the other day that the terrible Torah portion we read a couple of weeks ago about when a man gets jealous of his wife, right, and makes her undergo the ordeal, the sota ordeal, right, is that in a sense that really is just it's forcing us to recognize, right, in so many of our societies, right, men believe they own their wives, and they still believe that, right, and they still believe that they have essentially that they can violently assert that right of ownership, right, and that's not, unfortunately, that's not different today, right.
They're still doing it.
It's right. Domestic violence is still a major problem, and it's become very, very difficult in the context of COVID because it's harder for women to duck out of the way and let their husband calm down. So I think it's important to recognize that but then there's the next level of it. I can't figure out how to make any use of that sota thing, right? This one, I feel like, let's do what the rabbis do, right? Read women and house as meaning the same thing, right? And so don't spend too much time in your house, because if you spend too much time working on your house, right, then you're going to neglect the creative work of Torah that's necessary for your soul, right?
And if you're raising a family, you have to spend time with your children.
Of course you do. Of course you do.
That's right. That's a full-time job.
Well, no, I don't think it needs to be a full-time job right? I don't think it needs to be a full-time job if you're lucky enough to have two parents who are going to share the burden of it, right? For many years I was the house husband. When I was in rabbinical school, I was the house husband, and because my schedule was more flexible than my wife. So I was lucky. I got to spend more time with my kids when they were younger than many men do. And then when I graduated from rabbinical school and started working, crazy job where I was out 3 nights a week, it was terrible. It was awful.
You miss them.
Yeah, I missed them. I was also, shall we say, I was also neglecting Torah because I wasn't working as a rabbi.
That's right.
So, Neil, you want to say something?
Well, I was thinking that it implies that the only relationship a man can have with a woman is as his wife. Doesn't think about mothers, sisters, daughters, cousins.
Right. And I think that's right. And I really love that comment, Naomi, because for me that really underscores, right, the sort of sense, right, that obviously is not going to tell that a man is going to spend time with a sister, with a mother, right? So there is already kind of a fantastical element to this, right, where it's where you don't spend too much time with your wife, right, on your house, but I do think especially not your wife, right? Why? It doesn't think about, I don't think this means like don't hang out with your mother, right? I think that honor your mother and your father, right, is a more important mitzvah, right? So than that, so it can't just be neglected, right? So I think this is like adultery, right? So it does think of so I don't know, Naomi, if the writer of Pirkei Avot is really only thinks of relationships with women as being either sexual or domestic or both, right? As much as I think that that's what this mission is about.
Say that again?
I don't imagine, right, that the writer of this Mishnah thinks that the only way that a man can interact with a woman, right, is either as a wife or as an adulteress, right, or as a prostitute, right? But rather that those two categories is what he has in mind in this Mishnah, right? That this Mishnah is about spending time with women with whom you might have a sexual relationship,
Really?
right? You're not going to have a sexual relationship with your mother or your sister, right? By and large, this one is really about, where are you going to have a sexual?
I don't see anything in there about sex.
No, of course not. But we read that in without a problem, and no one says like, "Oh my God, it's not about sex."
I did.
Yeah. Oh no. No. You didn't think. But would you object that you think it's not about sex?
I'd have to know more what surrounds this thinking and
But that's the whole point.
But on
Endorse it.
this alone, I can imagine other thoughts.
Like?
I can imagine just general instruction, how to spend your time.
Well, I think that's right. But I think that whenever if you're a rabbi, right, and the word woman comes up, right, where there are questions.
Because I'm not a sexist.
No, but these guys are. So you have to.
I don't think they are.
Yeah.
I don't see it there yet.
Well, oh yes. I mean, this is clearly a patriarchal text, right?
Let's put it this way: sexist in the way we understand it. I don't see it in the way I understand sexist.
I mean, I don't know how you understand sexist, but there's clearly an equation here,
That's
right?
really what?
Clearly an equation here
Okay.
between spending time with women, right, and really adverse outcomes.
Well, no, here's the other thing that I want to
It
say.
says only
It
one.
says, do not engage in too much conversation with women. That doesn't in and of itself it can stand alone. I think it can stand alone, or it could stand in terms of other interpretation.
Well, yes.
I think that it could be that they highly value women, that they trust them, and they otherwise feel that they're on their own, that they're doing well.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is one of the things that is, I think that you're onto something, right? In the sense that in this society that produced this text, right, there was a great separation of men and women, right? I do think that that's true. But I also think
in this society or in that society.
That society.
The separation of men and women could be very positive, and it allows a non-interrupted, and it could be an eschew that the fact that it's been misinterpreted, and not to eschew women into a role and a mode in which they're not to be.
So there's to be seen but not heard is basically.
No, not to be imposed upon in the sense that there's a strong and the weak. That
I don't know, Maury. I have a hard time. Squaring myself with this sort of notion that the patriarchy of our tradition, right, is really about how much we value the women and how we want to protect them, right. patriarchy means that men are in a superior position.
That may be true in itself, but it's not stated there, and it's on the other way.
Yeah, but
what do you bring to a relationship if it's not going to be love and attention to what's right?
Well, this would appear to be the opposite of that, right?
Why?
Because it says don't spend too much time don't spend so much time talking to your wife, and definitely don't spend so much time talking to other people.
They may respect the fact that they have a view that's not to be imposed upon.
But go ahead, Shirley.
I don't think a man would cause evil to himself or inherit hell if he was just being a nice guy and talking to a woman.
Exactly.
Say it again, Mark.
Well,
Right. That's why I think that this you can't and so I think on one hand, Sandy was reading very literally from a very negative perspective about this text. I think you're reading it very literally, giving the text a lot more credit than it deserves. And
Not
go ahead,
negative. I was reading the words and I know the laws.
well, I'm just thinking about protecting the widow and the orphan
Yeah.
and other similar kinds of,
Mhm.
or for that matter, Ruth wandering around and gleaning in the fields.
Right.
That's part of
And we read this in
domestication, taking
the
care of the
end
house.
about Torah, the study of Torah. The study of Torah should give him the strength that he needs to do in support of his wife.
Well, actually, that's just what we were talking about, Maury, right?
But I don't read it as a negative. I read it as a compliment and as a supplement that would help them strengthen a right attitude, not a wrong attitude. So I'm sorry to say that a lot of misunderstanding about about life has read itself in there in a negative way.
There's no way that I can say to myself, right, that as long as a man engages in too much conversation with women, he causes evil to himself. I can't read that as being a positive way. Right.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. All right. So, but what I am trying to say, right, is that I do think, right, that one of the reasons we can't read any of these texts completely literally, right, is because that's not how they were intended, and also because that's not how the rabbis read Torah. Right, literal readings are one reading. Right, it's not that they're invalid. Right, it's not that it's that we can't only read text that way. Right. So as I said before, and you may have missed this, right, Maury, that when you with the word bait and the word isha, the word for house and the word for woman, right, are often interchangeable. Right?
I think that's an overread. I think that's an overreading by rabbis who go crazy over interpretation.
No, it's not. This is in rabbinic texts, Marty. This is in rabbinic texts. I'm not talking about them reading this way in the Torah. I'm saying that in rabbinic texts, that is just
not a purely orthodox way of thinking.
Anyway, Marty, we can talk about this later. In the Talmud, right? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, when he's offered to become the head of the yeshiva in place of Rabban Gamaliel, he says, I need to go and consult with my house. He didn't mean I need to consult with the building where I live. He meant I need to confer with my family.
I agree.
Right? And then when he gets home, whom does he talk to? He talks to his wife.
Mhm.
Right? So that's all I'm saying. I'm not making any radical this is just the basic the way the rabbis work, right? So that's why I'm saying that this is about this Mishnah, right, is about the interaction between men and women who are potential sexual partners, whether legal or illegal, right? And so, and I still am not comfortable with it, as Sandy is not, and I imagine most of the women in the room are not comfortable with this text. And so the only use I can make out of this text, right, is what I said before, right? That is try not to devote your entire self to domestic concerns. And I think that today, this text should include, this text is not just for people who gender themselves as male, I think this is people, right? People in general should not spend too much time on their domestic affairs, right? They should find a balance with other parts of their lives, right? That so that they are able to be, they are able to have creative and, which is not to, is in no way to demean domestic work, right? It's very important to do. I think it's very important for everybody to do, right? But there are other things that you need to attend to. And what's the value here that really matters? Torah study, right? So everyone should be doing Torah study, right? And you shouldn't spend all Shabbos washing the dishes, right? You should spend some time also learning Torah. All right.
Let me ask you this, Rabbi. When they Torah study, what do they learn and how do they interpret it? Is my question as to what might be truly groundbreaking and basic to their understanding. And I think a lot of people walk away with that understanding, and it's perfect, the one you mentioned. And I think that's perfectly understandable, but I think it misses the mark.
I mean, it might. It's just Maury, for my living, right? If I were to take that advice literally, don't spend too much time talking to women. Look at this room, Maury. Who would I be talking to?
But one more thing. I wouldn't spend too much time talking to women if I already knew what to do.
I'm sorry?
I wouldn't spend, woman or man, I wouldn't spend an inordinate amount of time speaking to either human persons if I knew what to do.
Well, I mean, again, that. It's basically, I think it's don't waste time. I think is ultimately what it means. Anyway, okay. So Joshua ben Parahia and Nitai the Arbalite received the oral tradition from them. Right. So actually, we did actually do this, I think, right?
No, not this
Oh
part.
no, we didn't. Okay.
Not this part.
Okay. Joshua ben Parahia used to say, appoint for thyself a teacher, and acquire for thyself a companion, and judge all men with the scale weighted in his favor. Okay, so one point of translation, which is important. So kol ha'adam, right? This is not man, right? This is person. Kol ha'adam. Right? So every person. I think the translation, right, has the old-fashioned sense of man as being the general term for men and women. That we don't tend to do that anymore. We tend to make it clear when we're talking about all of humankind. So I think that's important to point out here.
What is the Hebrew of companion?
Haver.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, right? So I think we might have mentioned this briefly last week, right? Aseh lecha, right? Appoint for thyself is the translation here. The literal translation of aseh, right, is make for yourself, right? It's a very active, right? A very active process. You need to go out and find a teacher and make that person your teacher, right? It's not just a matter of which is I think really important to say, right? Because we can today very easily sit in our houses, right, and listen to podcasts and online courses all day, right? And you can learn a tremendous amount that way. But that is not the same, right, as making for yourself a teacher. Making yourself a teacher means, what do you think it means?
Seeking.
So seeking, right? Seeking, right? And even beyond seeking.
Doing.
I'm sorry?
Doing.
Right. What do you have to do to make for yourself a teacher? What's the doing involved?
Becoming a student.
I was just thinking.
What did she say?
Becoming a student.
Yes, becoming a student. What does it mean to be?
My head at the same time.
And I'm gonna push you a couple more levels. What does it mean to become a student? And not just become a student, but to become someone's student.
Interact.
Yes, interaction. Go ahead, Naomi.
Oh, that's about what I was going to use a different word.
Yeah, but what's the word you were going to use?
Also engage with that person.
Exactly. engage in a relationship with that person, right? Teaching and learning is not just about looking in a book, right? Or watching a television program, right? You can see a wonderful, endless array, right, of amazing television programs on a whole range of subjects, right, on public television and beyond, right? You can learn a tremendous amount. But unless you learn that in some way in relationship with the teacher, right, that learning is not going to be the same.
You talk one by one.
Right.
That's what you do,
Right.
learn one by one to learn it.
Or like this, right? Or in a group,
Yes.
right? Where there's someone who's teaching, right? We're all learning together, right? But I'm as the facilitator, right? I'm the teacher, and you are all the students. But we'll get to that in a minute. Go ahead.
Again, I'm intrigued by this word companion.
Yes.
Rabbi, I can't hear a
Oh, yeah.
thing.
Okay, Sandy. That would be so much easier if you were here. Naomi will say her piece, and then I will translate into loud.
I'm not sure what exactly is a companion.
Yeah.
And my initial thought was, is that in some way a synonym for wife? Or what exactly is this other person?
Yeah, it's a great question.
It's
So
a-
Sandy, her question is, well, what really does this word haver mean, right? And is it what?
It means a companion.
Well, I think it also has been translated as comrade,
Right,
so.
Or friends.
In other
Friend.
contexts.
right, or friends.
But-
Right, go ahead, Shirley.
I'm almost reading it like the teacher and the companion could be the same person.
Well, I think that's what's really important,
Or a
right?
friend.
Right, is that in a sense, right? This is something that we'll see later in Pirkei Avot, right? Is that you need to learn from everyone, right? That your job as a learner, right, is to learn from every person,
Yeah.
right? That everyone has something to teach you,
Yeah.
right? And so, which I have found just to be generally true. That I learn a tremendous amount when I listen to the people that I'm learning with. And if I don't listen to them, this is one of the reasons I don't really do lectures, because if no one ever talks and I just spin my wheels, first of all, no one would understand me. But also I wouldn't learn anything. So so I do think these two categories, right, of Rav and Haver are very linked, right? Although they are distinct,
Yeah.
right? They are distinct because the Rav is not only a teacher, right? The word Rav means master, right? And so someone that you sort of put above yourself in some sort of a way. And God willing, that person is not someone who will put themselves above you, right? That's one of the things that's really important. Maury, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was thinking, there was something I was remembering for this weekend's meeting of a group of men from Temple. And one of the things that was on the prayers on Saturday is it says, Havarim Kol Israel Bioma, and you're supposed to say Amen.
Yeah.
So all of Israel are brethren. And I was trying to relate that thinking from where this person, Pirkei,
Yeah.
got his thought. And he could have generated his thought from a number of situations, including prayer. And prayer being a lead-in to me on a judgment question of asking God for certain outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Could companion also be, I don't remember the word you used last week, but when you studied Torah, when a man studies Torah, they do it with another student,
Right.
and that same student all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's called a Hebruta.
Thank you.
Right.
That was what I was
And
thinking.
again, I'm just going to correct you, right? That it's not when men study Torah,
Well,
right? It's when people study Torah now,
Yeah,
right?
just
But it's just important.
Yeah.
It's just important to always keep that
my-
paradigm shift in mind, right? Because even in many Orthodox settings now, women are studying Torah and Talmud in a way that they previously were not, right? And they do that study with chavrutas, just the way the men do.
That was the word I was
Yeah.
trying to think.
And so I do think, right, and in an ideal chavruta situation, right, you are teaching and learning at the same time, right? It's the Jewish version of two heads are better than one. So if two people are looking at the text at the same time, right, you're able to go much deeper than if you were by yourself.
Well, when one is directed to appoint for thyself a teacher, is it kind of like a Match.com for a student and for companions, in that how do you know, and does it matter that the first person you meet is going to be an ideal study partner?
Right.
And is there that element in it or not?
Well, I mean, I think, right, that before we go too far on that, I would also point out, right, that we have an odd word, just like we have an odd word to make yourself a teacher or to appoint yourself a teacher, right? We have this word, and here it's translated literally, acquire for yourself, right? Acquire, right? It usually involves some sort of transaction, right? Some sort of, it's so your idea about Match.com is kind of interesting, right? Why do you go onto a dating site? You pay the dating site, right, to make you a match, right? You have to acquire a match. So I'm not sure what I can make out of this. I was actually gonna look at this whatever it is here. I don't think it's here though. Yeah, it is. Okay. So acquire a companion. So anyway, he doesn't talk about why it's acquire, but I do think in response to Naomi's question, right, that this chaver, yes, I do think it's chavruta, but I do think it goes beyond that, right? And I think, but I will say, right, is that chavrutas, in my experience, I have a chavruta, and my relationship with her, right, is different than all my other relationships, right? It's a very deep relationship based on years of studying together, right? And we know each other extremely, extremely well in a way that I don't necessarily have that kind of relationship with anyone else. And so I do think in a sense, becoming a chavruta with someone, if it sticks, and I've had plenty of chavrutas where, not so good.
That's what
Right?
I'm talking about.
It happens a lot when you find your chavruta, right? When you really find the right person, it is like finding a partner in other parts of your life, right? It's not, you may not have your life partner as your chavruta, right? You don't need to combine those two things, right? But you do have, if you find the right chavruta, you will have a partner for life, for study at least. All right, and so the last piece, right? Judge all people, right, with the scale weighted in their favor, right, on the side of merit. That's what lechaf zechut literally means, on the side of merit.
Give people the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is one, right, Phyllis, I think this is one that you would mention this at the beginning, right? Why do we have rules about stuff, right? We have rules about stuff because, well, very often people do the opposite. And I think we see that a lot. Right? And one of the most helpful things in my own personal life, right, was the point at which I began to be much more mindful about actively attempting to assume good intentions on the part of the other person. Can't always convince myself, not perfect, obviously, in any particular way. So obviously I fall into the trap as much as anyone else does, but I do think, right, that being mindful that that's a possibility and that the other person, probably has good intentions. You can't know, obviously, but you can't know also that they have bad intentions. So giving them at least the benefit of the doubt or a neutral attitude, right, can be helpful. Go ahead.
Well, I think that statement also reinforces what I was saying about the fact that, and also what the Torah talks about in judgments, in the area of judgment of guilt or innocence or whatever, how that din would sit on a question with like-minded rabbis, as if you want to put them in that role as companions or whatever, judges, to reinforce the fact that any judgment at all has to be done by more than one individual.
Well, right, and that's actually really interesting. Right, so and this is really, that's a great question, right? Is this talking about interpersonal judgments? It certainly is using the word dan, right, which is the same root as din, right, which means about judgment, right, in the sense of law, right? But I've always read this as being, because this is directed at an individual, I've always read this, right, as being about the judgments we make internally, as opposed to external judgments in a court of law.
Well, that's important as part of the total, I would suggest, but I don't want to mince words with that. I think it's a sound thought. But I think that anybody who forms a thought individually then expresses it is doing so in this manner.
Yeah. Yeah, this particular this particular yeah, I mean, but I do think it functions in both contexts, right? It functions in both contexts, right? Is that it is perhaps even part of the American tradition of a man is presumed innocent until proven guilty, right? We start from that perspective, right, in a court of law, right? We assume that he's innocent, and we need to prove to us, right, which is not the same in other legal systems.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So in that case, this would make an argument, right, that American jurisprudence is closer to the rabbinic, right, than say English, which I think it's the opposite. All right, Nitai the Arbalite used to say, keep a distance from an evil neighbor, do not become attached to the wicked, and do not abandon faith in divine retribution.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
Just the opposite.
I'm sorry?
It sounds like it's just the opposite of what we studied.
Sounds like just old.
Right. Okay. So one of the ways that we that it can be helpful to learn rabbinic texts, right, is to figure out what's the commonality. Like, what we didn't really do that here. I mean, a little bit we did, right? What's the what links these three things, right? And then when we have these pairs, I think I mentioned last week, right, that at this point we are going to be introduced to a series of pairs, right? And so what's the relationship between the statements of one of those guys and the other guy, right? So since we only have 5 minutes, maybe we'll not try to figure out how to avoid abandoning faith in divine retribution, because boy, that's a tough one. All right, but instead, right?
Maybe instead of calling them guys, you can call them people.
Yes.
Yes, we can search. No, well, I could, except they're all guys. I mean, in this case, they're all guys. I mean, I try to be good about that, but I don't always succeed. But all the people named in this part of Pirkei Avot are men, as far as I know. Go ahead, Shirley.
In the very first sentence
Yeah.
of that paragraph, we are introduced to these two gentlemen.
Yes.
They received the oral tradition
Yeah.
from them.
Right.
Who are them?
Them is the guys from before.
Oh, okay.
Right. So
That's what I
Yossi
thought.
Ben
I wasn't
Yoezer
sure.
and right.
That's what I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
The other thing is they receive the oral tradition. Is
Yes.
this all about prior to the Mishnah?
Yes, exactly. So for people who may have missed a previous version of this, and by the way, all of these are on, if something is confusing, you want to hear it again, it's on YouTube. So you can go and look at it on YouTube if you're truly a glutton for punishment. But so you can go back to, I think, to the first one on this topic, Shirley, if you can find it. So the on one foot version, right, is that the Mishnah is sort of the starting point for the codification of the oral law, right, as opposed to the written, right. So the written is what we have in the Torah, right. The oral law is what has come down, right, as rules for Jewish life, right, that are not necessarily included in the Torah, right? And what the rabbis do in contradistinction, right, to say Christian Jews or to Sadducees, right, is that they say that these rules are of the same status. This material is at the same status as what we find in the Torah, right? And we need to deal with it with the same level of care, right? And so all of these are traditions that came before the Mishnah and were collected in the Mishnah. There's also a whole bunch of other material, right, that is from the same period, but was not included in the Mishnah. And there are other books. And one of the big things in the Gemara, right, in the Talmud, is that they take traditions that we find in the Mishnah, and we find a tradition that is similar but has a different, seems to say something different, and we say, well, which is it, right? And we try to make everything fit nicely into it. Okay?
Yeah.
It doesn't work very much. But okay. So other questions, thoughts? And I just want to say one more thing. So if we had to say, okay, what is it that makes this all one, right? That links these three statements of Yehoshua ben Parahia, right? I think that it's about the absolute importance of relationship, right? That in a sense, you need someone, right? That we all need to have people, right, that we can look up to, right? For instance, my kids used to come home, when I would come home from work, and they learned that the executive director of the organization I used to work with was going to be leaving, and they said, "So, Dad, does that mean you're going to be the boss?" And I said, "God forbid! That's the last thing I want. I want someone to be my boss, right? I like, unfortunately, the way it worked, I had like 8 or 9 bosses, which was many too many. But it's important to have people, right, that you look up to, right? But it's also really important, right, to have people who are your companions, right, your chaverim, right? And at the same time, right, and you need to have relationships with these people, right? That's the point of it. Your boss is not somebody, right, or your Rav, right, is not someone who is off somewhere else, ideally, right? Ideally, they are in some sort of regular communication with you, right? And so at the same time, right? Sometimes, your Rav and your Chaver can be the same person, right? That is certainly possible, right? And that happens a lot with rabbis, right? Where we sort of switch places, so to speak, with one another from time to time. But that in all of those, in any kind of relationship that you have, right, that what's really important is to assume good intentions on the part of the other person, right? That is a constituent element of making for yourself a teacher and for acquiring a companion, right? And if you can't see the good side of people and assume their good intentions, it's going to be very hard for you to have the kind of relationships that you want to be able to have. So that's how I would tie those three things together. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sandy.
Thank you.
We're not gonna have this the next few weeks.
Right, no, we will, you will.
Rabbi
Just,
Rachel?
Rabbi Rachel is taking over
Oh,
for the next couple of weeks.
okay.
And then
You'll
we'll,
be here Saturday upstairs?
I'll be here on Saturday upstairs, and Friday down here, Saturday upstairs.
Good.
Yeah, we'll have our big bar bat mitzvah party.
Yep.
Oh, that'd be
That's-
Yeah,
nice.
that'd be fun, and we'll take it from there, all right? And Rabbi Rachel will be, as I said, will be taking over for,
Oh, I didn't realize.
for me, in all the